Many students often claim that they cannot draw on the computer when in fact they already know how as a function of their analog education. 2D drafting or modeling is basically a four-step process. So the very first step is so for example, if we take a look at our object here, the very first step involves visually inspecting our object here, visually inspect imagery, or visually inspect the subject. So in this case, this is the subject. And as you visually examine the subject, you want to do this without being discriminate. So we're not going to really care too much that it's a bottle and then maybe it wasn't very nicely sketched. It was actually sketched on a tablet. So we're not going to worry too much about that. We're just going to look at it without being discriminate about it. And we're going to pay attention to how our eye moves across this visual. And then the second step involves identifying the spatial organization. So simply by paying attention to where our eye moves across the object, we can identify the spatial organization. So this works, of course, both in 2D and with 3D subjects. So in this case, we know that it's a linear type object. So we have our little linear line there, which leads into the third step, which is to draw in reference lines. So these are usually invisible lines. These are things you don't usually keep in a sketch that help us give the object form. So kind of think of these as lines that we would use for a framework or the spine of our subject. So that's what those are. And then finally, our fourth step, we draw in the primitive geometry. So remember, this involves circles and squares, or we can use points and lines or triangles. And this applies also with 3D versions, so you can do spheres and cubes and cones and so on and so forth. So in this example, I drew some 2D ones. And then from this point on, it's just a matter of just going through the steps 1 through 4 over and over and over. So for our last 4 steps, we basically did it for the entire object as a whole. So the second iteration of this loop, we want to spend a little bit more detail into modeling. So maybe we take a part of this bottle and we model that component running through these 4 steps. So just taking a look at this is as the sketch progresses. So it's just basically running through the 4 steps over and over and over until the sketch is complete.